and to the second in the series of special Millennium Lectures. On September the 21st, we were treated to a very enlightening and entertaining presentation on man's epic struggle to deal with time. It was a presentation on clocks and calendars, and it was all about time. It was very delightful and entertaining by Dr. Joseph Siani, who's here tonight. This evening, we take you on a journey of 5, 6, or maybe 7,000 years in time across the Pacific, from across the Pacific, through Polynesia to Hawaii. And we're very pleased and honored to have with us this evening two very distinguished scholars of Hawaiian studies, Polynesian studies, archaeology, archaeoastronomy, linguistics, and much more. Our first speaker will introduce the second speaker. And we are filling in a bit and waiting for the spotlights up here to be fixed. Just okay, so we're killing a few moments here. Now while doing so, let me introduce our first speaker, who's come to us from the mainland. He's just moved out from the Washington, D.C. area and now lives in Boise, Idaho. But his interest and his heart is out in the Pacific, in Polynesia, and particularly the Marquesas Islands. He's the author of numerous publications and many scholarly articles. And he currently, having retired now, he currently lectures on board cruise ships which ply the Pacific, most recently in the Indonesian area. But next month he'll be back in French Polynesia. And then in January back here in Hawaii, as the cruise industry here in the Hawaiian Islands continues to expand dramatically. So perhaps without further ado, I'd like to present to you Dr. Robert Suggs. Let's welcome him.
Back in this room, be back at Windward Community College. I've lectured here on many occasions, and it's a great pleasure for me to work with her Kumu, Kalani Mainiki, also with Professor Rubellite Kawena Johnson. I met them both 26 years ago in Hilo, and we have been in constant contact ever since. I really, I feel like I'm home when I come here. Tonight I want to talk about time to the archaeologist. Time from the earliest human history on, as far back as we can project it, seems that early man thought in terms of time in broad general seasons, moons perhaps, but not with a great precision that we think about it today. You didn't need to know about nanoseconds to spear a mammoth or to paddle a canoe, but you certainly did need to know about seasons, for winds, for sailing, for planting crops, for migratory herds of animals, and so forth. So there has always been this link between time and natural phenomena. The migrations of animals, the changing of the seasons, and in the mind of earlier peoples, this was always linked with, these changes were always linked with supernatural. So that there was a tight tie that grew up between religion and time. As a matter of fact, some of the earliest calendars that we find are calendars compiled by priests who were keeping track of taxes before the IRS, and I'm sure they were doing it just as well as the IRS too. But we're also keeping track of crops. In Egypt, it was the function of the priestly groups around the pharaoh to keep track of when the Nile would flood every year, because the Nile brought life to Egypt every year. Egypt is the gift of the Nile. And you had to know, you had to be able to predict when that was going to happen. So they're keeping a good close eye on the river and watching the river mount, and then at a certain time they know the flood is coming. In the Middle Ages, time became a subject of some concern to Christian believers in Europe, because they wanted to make sure they were celebrating the Christian holidays on the right day. That didn't work out too well, because you had the Eastern and Western divisions of the church who celebrated Easter and Christmas at different times, and still are. The last time I checked, with one of my friends, 17 days off the Christmas and Easter celebrations. The time became sort of a property of the church. After Charlemagne was crowned emperor by the Pope in 800 AD, there was a good solid link between the church and secular power. And the history of calendars since then has been one that is absolutely incredibly complex. I don't want to talk about this too much though tonight, because I want to get to archaeology. Let's see. For an archaeologist, the most important thing is what is older and what is younger. Now, archaeology as a science grew up in the in the Mediterranean world. In the Mediterranean world, it's pretty easy to do dating, because you had a lot of Roman documents, and the Romans were very handy in putting inscriptions on the places that they lived and the buildings that they built. And you could always go back to the documents, try to find the name of the man who was mentioned on the monument, and you knew pretty much, and after a while with very great precision, exactly when he lived. This is a Roman forum in Morocco, and very kindly provided with a stele, which tells you who dedicated it. There's no question there. We also know, for example, Pompeii. We know the day and the hour when Vesuvius erupted, because it was recorded, again, very thoughtfully by Roman historians. Pompeii was destroyed along with another town, Herculaneum, and Vesuvius is there in the background, still smoldering, and they're still digging out Pompeii behind these ruins here. There's a vast area that hasn't been touched yet, and at least apparently many other smaller towns around. But we know precisely when this happened. Sometimes we don't get exact information, but in this particular case, this is a town in Poland, a late Bronze Age town, Biskupin. These are the original fragments of the Corduroy Road in Biskupin. These are reconstructed houses. We know approximately when this happened, because when this town was destroyed, because it was mentioned by Greek historians, 500 BC. So this wood is 2,500 years old. It's a very interesting site. Very interesting site. Fortunately, the Germans left it alone in World War II. The war flowed around it, did not flow over it. And Stonehenge. Now, Stonehenge there are some problems with, because we tended to go more on tradition. It was believed that Stonehenge was a Druid monument, putting it about the same time as the Romans arrived in England. However, we now know that the early stages of this monument go back to about 3000 BC. These uprights are the last stage of a multi-stage construction extending over 2,000 years. We've learned that through radiocarbon dating. And I'll talk a little bit more about radiocarbon dating in a few minutes. So, outside of the area of the Mediterranean, where we were dealing with known historical documents, people where we could read inscriptions from Egyptian hieroglyphics and so forth, people were in a very difficult situation to try to tell the ages of things. Now, you can always use stratigraphy. Very simple principle. The stuff that's on the top is younger than the stuff that's underneath. So this particular shot, which is in the Marquesas, you've got some intrusive material that was buried here. This is a post hole where they had a large upright post, and they've used rock to wedge it in. But then on top, there was an earth oven built on top of that later. You see the outlines of that here. But basically, stratigraphy is all you have in many parts of the world. And you can't tell how old a thing is. You just know that relatively something is older than something else, and something is newer than something else. And for a good part of North America, this was the way it was for many, many years. For a good part of the world, actually, and particularly in the Pacific. In the Pacific, we tended to use genealogies. Now, Professor Johnson will be talking to you about an excellent study that she has done on genealogies. Hawaiian genealogies, I think, are far more accurate. They've been better preserved. They give us far better insight, and I'm very pleased to see her material because it ties in so well with archaeology in the Marquesas. The genealogy is quite similar in the early parts of it to the Marquesan genealogies. In other parts of Polynesia, however, and also in the Marquesas itself, genealogies do not always give the same accuracy. Here you have one, it's all marked up, you see my red marks on it. We're trying to reconstruct the genealogy of, Vaike, who is in here, the queen. And we have a situation where we've got 8 generations, an average of 16 years each. This is because they moved somebody in, this gentleman here, was not really the chief. He was moved in. He was a sub-chief, he was moved in, he took over somebody else's genealogy. And this happens fairly frequently in many Polynesian societies. Now, one place where I have used genealogies and used them very well is in Puamau, on the island of Hiva. This is the largest statue west of Easter Island, Takai'i. He's well over 2 meters high. This site was first investigated by Carl Suggs, a German ethnographer, in 1896. Suggs was not trained as an archaeologist, but he was a very smart guy, and he's written the best book on Marquesas that has ever been written, if you know German. And I'm fortunate in that I double majored in German, but even that, with a lot of experience and practice, it's very tough because his German is unusually obscure. Native speakers tell me he doesn't speak very good German. I can't say that. Okay, so what he did, he wanted to know how old this place was. He got 5 families to give him genealogies. Okay, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And these 5 families were all related to the pair of brothers who had originally built the site and put the statues up. So he said, well, it looks like between 5 and 7 generations back, figuring 25 years per generation, I'll say 1700 to 1750. I got dates from quarries in the north of the Marquesas around 1750, radiocarbon dates, 1750 AD. So the statues in the Marquesas are probably pretty late. And they certainly appear to be, radiocarbon dates for under this site are late 1500s AD. That means that the first people on the site were there about 1500. It doesn't tell you when the statues went up. The statues are all the typical Marquesan style statues that we know from the contact period. So here's how I've used them, and I think, in point of fact, that old Carl was a lot sharper and he saved a lot of money from his grant, whatever that was. He didn't have to pay for radiocarbon dates at 250 a whack. And then worry when they didn't come out right. That's always a problem in archaeologists. It's like, oh my God, supposedly the dates don't come out right. Now you can also do some interesting stuff with trade goods if you have trade goods of known age. This is a site in Taipiwai in Marquesas, and I dated this and other sites by historical material that was found in the sites itself. This particular site was one that's supposedly inhabited by Herman Melville, the American novelist. He jumped ship in the Marquesas, stayed there for 6 weeks, and wrote a novel called Typee, T-Y-P-E-E, a romance, a South Seas romance. This site is the site where he traditionally lived. We excavated it, and we found some things that indicated, not that Herman had been there personally, he left no graffiti, but we found some artifacts that indicated the site had been occupied roughly at the time that Melville was there. This is a big ceremonial plaza, a rectangular ceremonial plaza that contains, that stretches about 400 feet alongside the river, and with about 10 or 12 large house platforms around it. He lived at the north end of the enclosure. We found these are items which are earplugs. Marquesans pierced their ears, descended them, and put these plugs in. The holes were for feathers which would serve as cotter pins to hold the plug in your ear so that it wouldn't fall out. And they're carved whale's teeth. It was considered, this was a man's decoration, not used by women. Well, I noticed I managed to get one back. It's over. 2, right? Okay. Now this is the important thing. This is a tobacco pipe. Okay. So you know it's after Europeans. Europeans didn't come here until 1791. Melville was there in 1843. However, we've got one other thing, of which I do not have a picture, unfortunately, a nice Stiegelware glass bowl made in Pennsylvania, complete, unbroken, and they were produced after 1795 and into the early 1800s. So we know that the site was inhabited roughly at the time, just before the time that Herman arrived with his friend Toby. Now the thing that's really important, the big revolution in archaeology came after 1948 with radiocarbon dating. Charcoal here. Radiocarbon is an isotope that is in the air. It's formed in the upper atmosphere by bombardment of cosmic rays on nitrogen atoms. And we all inhale it. It's in very, very minuscule quantities. Trees have it. Everything that's alive contains radiocarbon. Once, say, a tree dies, the intake of radiocarbon stops, and the amount of radiocarbon in the material begins to decay. It decays at a very, very set rate. And so when you get charcoal like this, you can do it's a very, very complicated kind of test. But you can determine how long ago it was, the fire was made, within a certain span of error. Depending on the technique used, you can get down to within plus or minus 10 to 15 years. And for us in the Pacific, this was great because the genealogies had been saying, oh, Polynesian islands were not inhabited before 1000 AD. When I was sent to the Marquesas in 1956, my boss at the American Museum had worked a long time in the Pacific, Pitcairn Island, all over the place. Tuamotus, Tahiti, he'd also been in the Marquesas. He said, I want you to look around, okay? He said, but don't expect to find anything, any accumulation of archaeological material. He said, they've only been there a couple of centuries. We came back with dates 2000, years before the present. And he was really surprised. And we also found plenty of accumulation. The deepest site I found was 7 feet. 7 feet of solid cultural material. So there was a lot. And if we hadn't had carbon-14, we never would have known. We'd be fighting today to say that this was an earlier occupation than they claimed based on the genealogies that were being used at that time. Anthropologists who had worked in the Marquesas in 1920 said 900 AD at the most. Marquesan genealogies are very poor. They're very short. The depopulation was so severe in the Marquesas and so fast, in about a 20-year period, they dropped from approximately 100,000 people down to just 4,000 or 5,000. And by 1920, there were only 1,900 people left out of a population of 100,000. So with those people went all the knowledge, the traditions, the genealogies, and so forth. You have very little information. One of the things we used to wonder about was, where did the Polynesians really begin from? And even in the 20s and 30s, there was a lot of consensus that they started from Asia. Well, now with radiocarbon, we know that what time that journey began, and we can trace some of the Polynesian type artifacts across the Pacific from Asia. But these were not Chinese. They were on the coast of what is today China, but they were speakers of Austronesian languages. Austronesian is a language family to which Hawaiian, Tahitian, Marquesan, Rapa Nui, Maori, Indonesian, Philippine Islands languages, they all belong to that language family. So here we have Hong Kong. There are many, many sites in the Hong Kong area. We show you a few here, the red dots. Known for years, very obviously a seafaring people at that particular point in time. And here are stone adzes, hui in Hawaiian, which date back to 4700 BC in China. Now we know these people were Austronesian speakers because there are still some remnant populations left in the center of Taiwan in the mountains. The Moon Lake Aborigines, for example, are Austronesian speakers. Speak a language related to your Hawaiian. And here's some more adzes. Again, very much like Polynesian. You could have put that one in any collection from the Marquesas and nobody would have raised an eyebrow. They wouldn't have known it came from China, except if they looked at the stone type. And there are adzes of that type of stone, the white type. These are tapa beaters, grooved tapa beaters. Marquesan tapa beaters today are made of wood, but they have the longitudinal striations like this. They did not paint their tapa, they watermarked it with grooves. And these people had pottery. These footed pots are interesting because they reappear later on, about 2000 BC, in Melanesia, with a culture known as the Lapita culture. And Lapita is sort of the grandfather of the Polynesian peoples. Another type of pot, this is very similar, decoration is very similar to the Lapita decorations. Now here you have a little diagram showing the dark line is the perimeter of the area covered by, in which ocean-going canoes are used. This area here, the shaded area, is twin hull canoes. Actually, there's a mistake here. There's some twin hull canoes over in this area as well. The dotted line is encloses the area in which Austronesian languages are spoken. As you can see, the distribution of Austronesian and the distribution of canoes almost totally coincides. So that language was carried by sailors. And these are Polynesians, or the ancestors of Polynesians. In my view, the settlement of Polynesia is the single outstanding wonder of the ancient world. If you look at the pyramids, you look at the Colossus of Rhodes, look at Stonehenge, these are monuments to the egos of pharaohs, chiefs, kings, and so forth. All it took was slave labor and a lot of food to get people to work, put these monuments together. To explore from here all the way out to here, and probably much further actually, probably to the coast of South America, you have to have this, the heart and the head, okay? Now in the Marquesas, they don't speak about the heart, they speak about the koi koi, for the spirit. You have to have koi koi. And the occupation of the Pacific, to me, is a monument to the spirit of the Polynesians. Beginning 2000 BC, when Roman sailors, Phoenician sailors were afraid to go out the side of land and pull their ships in at night on the shore because they didn't like to sail at night. These guys were launching off over 500, 1,000-mile voyages, looking for land when they didn't necessarily know there was any, but they were looking. This is a little family tree of the languages. You can see all the different languages here that are related to the Austronesian family. Indonesia, Philippines, Madagascar, Malagasy languages, in fact, the Polynesian. Over here we have all the Polynesian languages, sort of as a subdialects of Fijian. How did they do this? Obviously, they had great boats. This is a Bugis prau in Sulawesi. The Bugis are today still sailing. They are very much interested in trade, and they're also interested in piracy. And they do both very well. They are the origin of the name of, by which they are known, is also the origin of the term in English, boogeyman. The English encountered them early in the 18th century and were not terribly pleased by what they saw. These guys are great. They're great sailors and they're even better fighters. This is a double outrigger in Mindanao. 2 years ago, I shot this. It's a motor vessel, but with outriggers, still following the outriggers or the twin hull pattern. Balinese canoes, same thing, double outriggers. All of these boats come off a general style, 1 or 2 outriggers or double hull. We also have the sea people, the sea gypsies, which you find quite often around in ports in the Philippines. Again, outrigger canoes, double outrigger canoes. They spend their lives on these canoes. They come ashore to bury their dead, but they're out there all the time on the boats themselves. Very poor people, very tough life, but this is the life they like. In many of the outlying areas of Polynesia today, Tikopia, Kapingamarangi, places like that, Anuta, talk to the locals. Death at sea is not a problem. Death at sea is the proper form of death. They are not afraid of the water. This is a very, very different attitude than Europeans have. You probably know that Captain Cook himself couldn't swim. And most of the people on the ship couldn't swim. He wouldn't be alive, he would have lived out his life in retirement, a happy retirement, if he could have swum from that point in Calendrical Bay. I hope he forgives me for that. Okay, Polynesian ships, thanks to Herb Conning. Okay, Polynesians themselves carried nautical technology very, very far. This is a Tuamotu Pahi. Tuamotus had very, very poor wood, small quantities, but they made their boats out of small planks laced together. And they got around a lot, much more so than their neighbors would have liked. Because some of the Tuamotu islands were really very wide. Marquesan canoe, bird's head and bird's tail. This is not the deep water voyaging, this is raids. And they're properly attired. War gloves. The Fijian and Drua. I saw the masthead of one of these in the Fiji Museum in 1957, or 58, The masthead was almost as tall as I am, weighed close to 1,000 pounds. It came from the biggest of the Embrua that were left, destroyed in the early 19th century, or early 20th century, over 110 feet. They carry a lot of people on one of these. And right down to the lowly Marquesan fishing canoes of today. Marquesas use rigid outrigger booms. They're still following off the outrigger and double hull model that brought your ancestors out from Asia. About 2000 BC, 1800 BC, in Melanesia, over near New Guinea, we find a very spectacular kind of pottery appearing. You remember there were feet on some of the Chinese pots to support conical bases. Well, there are a lot like this in this kind of pottery. This kind of pottery was first found in 1909 by a German missionary. American archaeologist in 1929 excavated in Tonga. There was no dates, no radiocarbon dating. So it was always assumed that this pottery in Tonga was traded in Fiji. Couldn't be anything else. The money's in that pottery. Everyone knew that. There were no mentions of pottery in Tongan legends. Okay? It wasn't until 1952 when pottery of this type was radiocarbon dated from a site in New Caledonia called Lapita, the Lapita site, that we realized, hey, this is 800 BC. Okay. Now we have traced it back to 1800 in western Melanesia. And it probably goes back further because there's undated material from Indonesia, Sulawesi particularly. This is a rendition of the design on that pot. You'll notice the face. Very common face. If you're familiar with Easter Island petroglyphs, 3,000 years, 4,000 years later, this face appears in Easter Island, the face of Maki Maki, the creator god. The eyes also very common, face again there. Here, it's hard to see it, but there's the nose. It kind of reminds you of the Kilroy Monsieur face, you know, in World War II, except that it didn't have that significance. This pottery is poorly made, actually. It's rather soft. It seems to have had a ceremonial use only, and it's believed to have been made by maids. Melanesian women make good pottery. There's another kind of pottery that goes with this that's utilitarian. And very thin, very, very hard fired, well-tempered, quite utilitarian, good for cooking. This stuff you couldn't cook in. This seems to have been decorated with tattoo needles, and it has something to do with masculine organizations, men's clubs, men's houses, something like this. Here's the face again. This face is found all throughout the area where Austronesian languages are spoken. Even the Dayaks in Borneo have tattoos with huge eyes. They call their god Api. Now these are Lapita hooks. They're not as sophisticated as the later Polynesian hooks, but they're still very good. And it turns out the Lapita were great traders. They've been able to trace their trade routes over 2,600 kilometers in the Admiralty Islands, trading various kinds of obsidian, various kinds of flint, pottery, and shelled ornaments made from cone shells. So it is quite likely that the early explorations of Polynesia began in a search for trading partners. They pushed beyond Santa Cruz, beyond the Solomon Islands. They pushed into Western Polynesia looking for trading partners. And of course, what they found was empty islands. But there was always the thought, I suppose, that someone would be the next island over. And they moved very fast. In a couple centuries, they went right through Melanesia and out into Western Polynesia. I apologize for the French title. One gets what one can. When one is trying next time. But I also I lecture in French and also in German. So I need to have some things. Here you have the quick movement down from up near New Guinea, down to New Caledonia, Fiji, Samoa, Tonga. Within 2 to 3 centuries, they made that transition very fast. And there's no doubt that we didn't find the earliest sites in any of these places. It's a crapshoot where you go looking for archaeological sites. You're lucky. You know what to look for, and you go to places where you think you'll find them. But whether you find them or not has a lot to do with all sorts of things. Now we know this from Melanesia. We know the Lapita culture from Melanesia. But these are from Sulawesi, up in Indonesia. And they're undated. They were dug up in the 30s by a Dutch archaeologist. So we have no idea how old Lapita is up there. But here's the face again. Pat Kirch, who is a Hawaiian born, excellent archaeologist, full professor at Berkeley, has a face just like this that he dug up in Tikopia. Obviously, a god of the early Polynesian or proto-Polynesian peoples. Okay, here's a quick diagram to show you how things went. From up here, one branch of Lapita went down into Western Polynesia. Another branch went up into Micronesia. And you'll see lots of things in Micronesia that are very, very Polynesian. Poi pounders, some of the terms for chiefs and so forth, on islands like Pohnpei are quite reminiscent of Hawaiian terms. And the thought right now is, given our present knowledge, that the first real settlement in the far eastern Polynesia was in the Marquesas Islands. But we also know that there were people here in the southern Cooks, 500 BC. So it's probable that they were in Tahiti as well, but we only have dates of 800 AD from Tahiti, the early states. The Marquesas seems to have been a distribution point for all of eastern Polynesia, or much of eastern Polynesia. This is Hiva Oa. Marquesas is different than Hawaii. There are no fringing reefs. The ocean comes right in against the cliffs. The cliffs drop off very steeply. You jump off the cliff and you're in 90 feet of water. And there's a lot of wildlife in the water. I am one of those haole who do not feel terribly comfortable in the water, so I don't swim a lot in the Marquesas. I stopped swimming because I wasn't seeing anything, and I knew they were there. Little shot to show you what the interior looks like. This is up in the central plateau near Taipei on Nuku Hiva. This is Taiohae Bay, Nuku Hiva. Marquesas, noted for its rugged, very rugged terrain. Valleys inhabited by single tribes, most of which were at war with the neighbors on either side most of the time. Constant raiding going on. And this is Taipei, the main valley, sort of the Waffen-SS of the Marquesan culture. These guys raided all over the islands, and they were definitely, they're very, very much feared and much disliked. And you talk to Marquesans today about Taipei, oh, Taipei Kaikayanan, Taipei man-eaters. I speak Marquesan with a Taipei accent. I get a lot of ripping elsewhere in the archipelago. And this is the site where we made some real advances in Polynesian history. This is Hatuatua Bay on Nuku Hiva, uninhabited valley, 750-meter dune. I came upon it. Local told me that there were pig bones washing out of the face of the dune there, and I should go over and take a look at it. Well, they weren't pig bones. It was a huge village site, including pig, dog, everything, but also there were burials there. This was the temple platform. We got a date of 2025, if I'm not mistaken, from burned human bone from underneath this temple platform. This is starting to work the first day we went to work there. The big surprise was this, pottery. I found it the first day we were there, the second season. And this is the hard, well-fired stuff that the Melanesian women made, Lapita women made. It's very good, it's very well made. These sherds did not come from the Marquesas, they came from Fiji. Geological analysis has shown that they contain minerals that are only present in the River Delta in Fiji. Some of the other sherds that we found on the site are probably made of Marquesan clay. They're not identifiable as Fijian. It's a trip of 2,700 miles between Fiji and the Marquesas. It's not even close for government work. So this is a big thing. Now, I'm not saying that they necessarily came from there, but when you ask the early European explorers, particularly Captain David Porter, 1813, we asked the chief of one of the chiefs of Taiwan, where did you come from? And he said, Laval. Straightforward, you know? Hey, you want an answer, you got an answer. It came from Laval, Tonga. Everyone has seen that since and said, oh, that's impossible. That's impossible. No, it's not. It's not impossible, because it's quite likely that the Tongans were in contact with the Fijians, and there was some pottery being traded back, and some Tongans got over there with Fijian-made pottery. These are Polynesian or Marquesan hooks. This type here, these types here are found in the early period. They die out, and they are replaced largely by very small hooks or hooks with double shanks. Take a piece like that and lash it onto the side of the shank here. These particular hooks are interesting because they're very reminiscent of Hawaiian. And these are the tools that they used to make the hooks with, just flakes, stone flakes, and coral files. Here you have the Hawaiian hooks. You may recall 2-3 slides ago, there were a number just like this. There are a few like this. But it's believed that the Marquesans settled, or at least one of the settling groups in Hawaii. The Marquesan calendar shares many, many terms with the Hawaiian calendar. Thanks to Professor Johnson's work, I did some work on the Marquesan calendar myself, following her work, using her work as a basis, and explored it a bit further. Both Hawaiian and Marquesan calendars contain large numbers of Micronesian terms. So there's an indication that these people did come from the West, someplace. Whether it's in Tonga or whether it's a bit north of Tonga, we don't know. And your typical stone adzes, very little change from the adzes seen in China, 4700 BC. And for the ladies, breadfruit skinners, some squid lures. These remain unchanged throughout 2,000 years of Marquesan prehistory. Now, from the Marquesas, they went north, as I say, went north to Hawaii. At least we think so. There's a great deal of argumentation about when the early dates for Hawaii should be placed. My feeling is that they're very, very early in the Christian era. I side with Pat Kirch, who says the only decent date from Kumulipo site is the 262 AD date. I think you'll find ultimately that there are more early dates from Hawaii that put it closer to the AD BC line, if not on the other side. Hawaii has a different environment. Taro is a much more popular food form up here in the Marquesas. Breadfruit takes the place of taro. They have taro, but breadfruit is much more important. So immediately there are changes in the culture. And of course, because of the size of Hawaii and the richness of the environment, you were able to produce a great culture up here. Very, very highly stratified, brilliant Polynesian culture. The Marquesas never got to the point where they took off like this. They did not have the territorial organization or the political organization that Hawaii had. And of course, some fairly large stone structures here. Kamehameha's War Temple. And the Marquesas also went west a bit and down the Tuamotu Islands, and they settled a lot of the small atolls on the eastern edge of the Tuamotus. In some places out there, Napuga and Re'au, the language is actually quite close to Marquesan. It seems to be ancient Marquesan that they speak. And then we go down to Easter Island. Now this doesn't look like a ditch, I know, but it is the Poike ditch that cuts across one end of Easter Island. Thor Heyerdahl's people dug here. They didn't find any artifacts, but they got some charcoal, so they dated it. Oh boy, 480 AD. The local archaeologists, the Chilean archaeologists, don't think much of the 480 AD date. I don't know really what to think of it. I would feel much better if there had been some charcoal found. But there's a ditch that runs right along here between two parts of the island, and it appears to be a place where two lava flows met and dirt washed in. There's a myth of a battle between the long ears and the short ears that took place here. Therefore the excavation was made. The best date, according to the Chileans, is from this site, which is Tahai, near Hangaroa. About right in here. They got a sample, 700 AD. And that probably is closer to the real McCoy. The legends of the Easter Island say that Hotua Matua came from Walailenga, and there is a temple, an ahu, on Easter Island that faces in the direction from which it came. Faces out. And he's facing the Marquesas. I think other people got to Easter Island, I think particularly Tahitians, because the form of the Easter Island temple is really a Tahitian temple, not like Marquesas at all. Marquesan temples were all like small houses. This is it's even called by the same name that the Tahitians call the temple. And here you have the biggest one on Easter Island, Tomariki. 15 statues, been restored. It was ruined by a tidal wave in the 30s, I think, in the 60s. It's been carefully restored with an enormous grant from a Japanese corporation under the direction of the Chilean archaeologist Claudio Piscino. A very, very impressive piece of work. And Tahiti, as I said, it's a beautiful place, but we have nothing earlier than 800 AD. I think we're going to find some very early dates in Tahiti too. But at the time being, most of what we see is temples like this. This is Marae Arapuru in Punalia. Quite late, actually. Quite late, maybe 1600 AD. And the last phases of settlement of Polynesia come out of Tahiti. Tahitians going up to Hawaii and Hawaiians going back down to Tahiti. 40 years ago, it was heresy to say that Polynesians could voyage. I played a principal role in a fight against a New Zealander who claimed that it was all settled by accident. Can you imagine? Every single island in Polynesia, whether it's inhabitable or not, has archaeological remains on it. Every single one. Including Ducie, which is supposedly never touched. I saw an ads on Ducie that had been picked up on Ducie. These people got around. they were great sailors, and it wasn't by accident. You don't settle a triangle 5,000 or 6,000 miles on the side by accident. So I come to the end. I've run just a few minutes over. I'm sorry. I was going to wind up with something rather personal about what time means to me. I have been fortunate in wandering around the world a lot in various capacities, and I've seen a lot of archaeological sites in a lot of places, and I wandered among the ruins of many civilizations. And I've seen things, you know, a few empires actually rise and fall, and participated in a very small way in the fall of one, the Soviet Union. So what does it all mean to an archaeologist to stand and look back over his career? Admittedly, there's not as much time left to me as there was 40 years ago. I guess I would sum it up by the words from the hymn, "Oh God, our hope and age is past." Those of you who are not believers, please forgive me for mentioning it. Time, like an ever-rolling stream, bears all its sons away. We fly, forgotten as a dream, breaks at the opening day. Oh God, our hope and age is past, our hope for years to come. You know I die, our life shall last, and our eternal home.
The outstanding kupuna for Hawaiian studies. Ironic that they should both have the same name, Kawena Pukui and Kawena Opio, young Kawena Kinney Johnson here. Kawena has retired from the University of Hawaiʻi, where she was full professor of Hawaiian language and literature, so she is now professor emeritus, and she has also kindly consented to come and teach on this campus a number of times as part of our Summer Institute in Hawaiian and Polynesian Studies. Most recently, this past June, co-teaching a course with Dr. Josiari on Hawaiian and Polynesian skies. So here tonight, by special request and some arm twisting, we're very delighted to have with us Professor Emeritus Rubellite Kawena Johnson.
Mahalo everybody for coming, and mahalo everybody for staying. We better hurry up because some of you can get up tomorrow morning and go to work. So. Robert Carl Suggs. I think the first time I saw his name was on a little pocket book called Island Civilizations of Polynesia. Are you familiar with it? To read it. I had it on the boat. I was sailing, I don't know which trip it was, one down to the Marquesas from California and the other one down to New Zealand. I sailed 20,000 miles by sea. And I remember that the first time I saw that book, and I found out that he mentioned pottery in it. I took it to the Bishop Museum, passed it around to the solid cast of characters who were there so many years ago. These solid fixtures in archaeology and ethnology. He said, no, catch me. Pottery in the Marquesas. That was a new one. Then I went away to something in Japan called the Pacific Science Congress. Lo and behold, there was Jack Golson from New Zealand with all of his answers. And then there was so many there with all of this stuff but Lapita pottery. I said, oh, there is pottery. Pottery in the Solomon Islands, pottery in Tonga, pottery in Marquesas. And by that time, it had become fashionable. And I remember that when the first publication came out, nobody was happy about it. Now, I think from age 17, when I came from Kauai to the University of Hawaiʻi, and really lived on a lawn for the first time, though I'd come here at age 2 or 3 and been hanai'd out to an irritable aunt. And my early memories of Oahu are very, very interesting. I went to Carter's kindergarten, lived on Keaumoku Street. So when I came back here at age 17, it was post-war, right? A lot of GIs coming back from Korea, and some GIs from my class dying over there. All of this interesting beginning. I remember walking to my first entered class, and the person who sat at the table and monitored us during the lab was no less than Saul Riesenberg. Does the name mean anything to you? Dr. Saul Riesenberg, oh my God. He brought skeletons to class that he brought from the Bishop Museum. He spent many years in Micronesia studying Micronesian navigation. The teacher of the lecture course was no less than Leonard Mason, Dr. Leonard Mason. I took my first anthrop courses from him. And he was involved in relocating Marshallese and people in Bikini, places like that, to other places more suitable. Then there was Catherine Luomala and her folklore and her studies of Maui, and she had a whole list of Maui names, the names for the hero Maui that stretched from the Marquesas to Luzon. In my junior year, I had to go along with her on her folklore expeditions through these names, Mosiksik, Masiksik, Maitiks, Maisiki, and Mosiksik, Maui, Tiki Tiki Atarang, and she had them. And lo and behold, when the Lampida pottery studies really came to the fore within the next, say, 10 to 15 years of that period, I noticed by checking the maps of the distribution of the Maui names, or names for Maui in Micronesia, Melanesia, Philippines, Solomon, New Hebrides, everywhere, where she had tracked them, that the same spots were also, especially in the region of Lapita pottery, discoveries almost the same set of locations. So thereby hangs a tale. But let me say this, that what was originally a find in the Marquesas and what became Lapita pottery dating for our generation when we were studying with these greats like Kenneth Emery in the evening, went to archaeology classes at night, introductory courses, where during that period he was doing stratigraphic excavations in Kau. I remember at that time there were certain things that were not allowed. I mean, in attitude, thought. So if you had a radiocarbon date that was like 450 AD plus or minus 100, that was okay. But if you got dates earlier, you sort of told the class, as he used to, now we find these dates in the same places, but you kind of have to ignore them because they're suspect dates. Now, that was in 1952 in the evening, 1952, 53, 54, 55, and lo and behold, not until 1968, 69, did those statistics ever reach published form. By that time, you see, they were no longer fashionable. However, I brought this tonight to kind of hammer home the things we overlook. So these are radiocarbon dates for Waiahu Kili Shelter Cave. Here's sea urchin spines, okay, radiocarbon date. 45 plus or minus 170 years, about 260 BC. Can't say anything about that. For Ka'u, here's another one. minus 90. See 30 BC over there? Forget it. Wipe it out, doesn't matter. So now on charcoal now. Dating, sand dune site. BC 300. Isn't that interesting? 290 BC. In those times, 30 BC would look out of joint, wouldn't it? See, that was what was interesting about Carl Suggs' dates, is that the pottery, and I think his dating was like 300 BC, possible settlement of the Marquesas to, or within range, say 100 BC to 100 AD, which for that time was sort of mind-boggling. Now, I did something of the same order, something so scandalous that for years, professors who knew me had to apologize because I gave a date for the computation of the Hawaiian calendar, even though it's Hawaiian. I made the statement that it had to be the calculation, original computation had to be around 3,500 BC. Of course, there are no Polynesians in Polynesia, right? But in the Kumulipo, I went right ahead boldly and said, in the face of my colleagues in anthropology linguistics, that this Hawaiian calendar computation had to match similar calendars in the world that may be dated back to 3,517 BC. And that date came out of the Vedic scholars. All right, Vedic scholars, I mean scholars in India. I've been reading their stuff. Who goes off to read anything from India to learn what's going on in Hawaii? But you see, when you're dealing with stars, when you're dealing with time levels, with star names, you kind of have to get out of here. You can't stay here because it doesn't work. Never mind that the archaeology dates limit us to 450 plus or minus AD settlement, and Lapita pottery dates maybe in Tonga is about 1200 BC, and carbon dating to about 1500 BC, and so on and so on and so on. And as we've heard tonight, 4700 BC in points farther west, like the coast of China and so on, Taiwan. What stirred me a lot was that when I went to work at the Bishop Museum, Dr. Emery and Dr. Edmund J. Bryan used the room where we worked in oral history, myself, Dorothy Pereira, and Ellie Williamson, threw all their junk. One of them, of course, are all of these navigation guard notes from Kupi Hale, which I didn't throw away. And I published that in 9 with John Mahalo. John, will you stand, please? And of course, Edmund J. Bryan was an astronomer curator. He didn't only curate, he had a big brain, and he plugged all his maps in our room. So I had to read his things, right? And in one of these, he says on page 46 of Stars Over Hawaii, the Hawaiian astronomers were coming out to genealogy and astronomy and archaeoastronomy and genealogical dating. We're well aware that the month did not fit evenly into the year. Well, a kid knows that. At the end of the 12th moon period, there were 10 or 11 days left over. What he means is that in a lunar year, there are 354 days, and then you add 11.25, and then you have a match to the solar year, near match. We do not know exactly how the Hawaiian astronomers managed the details of this problem. Dr. Peter H. Buck, a State Anahiro Maori scholar who was also director of the museum, learned on the atoll of Manihiki, north of Cook Islands, that they added a 13th month whenever it was needed. That is exactly what the ancient Greeks did. And one of the Greek astronomers named Meton worked out a cycle of 12 years with 12 months and 7 with 13 months, repeating itself after the 19 years had gone by. The 3rd, 5th, 8th, 11th, 13th, 16th, and 19th had 13 months. Then he made this statement, which I thought was kind of bad for him to have made it, because he never told us how he arrived at this assumption. Right? He says, the Hawaiian Kilo Hoku, that's the stargazer, doubtless discovered this, quote, metonic cycle in the same way Meton had by trying to make the month fit the year. Oh boy. Well, you should try it sometime. It will take you, as it took me, a long time. But to save you the trouble, we'll not get into details about that subject, because we've hashed that out in little classes that we've had various times. And Josiane helped me by telling me if I wanted to deal with the fraction, that for each third, 27 and a third, 27 and a third, 27 and a third, and you have about 1 day. So you add up these so-called sidereal months where they do that, and you'll get the Metonic cycle after 19 years. Douglas Fernandez, are you in the room? Will you stand up, please? Douglas came to my house one night and stayed till 2, 4 o'clock in the morning. He studied Kumulipo, which is the picture up there. He studied the rock just below. I'll show you in another second what it means to study that rock. Okay. Does nature make that? Does nature make those cuts in the rock? It's in the evening of November 18th and 19th, 1994, and it's when the sun is about setting. Do you see those cuts in the rock? They look like they've been humanly made, right? So it's an artifact. How to understand it is incredibly difficult. It takes this particular student I just mentioned days and days going out there at specific times, watching the stars in relation to this particular rock and deciding what the orientation is. And he stayed up with me one night, puzzling through this Metonic cycle. So did the Hawaiians have it? Did they have the same idea of time as the Greeks did? If they did, then what's the time level at which they understood it? That's more the question, isn't it? You see, Brian knew enough astronomy to make this assumption. He knew enough of what the Hawaiian Kahunas did, but he never bothered to explain to people like me how those numbers add up. The fractions are such that you wonder if the Hawaiians could do it, because they had no arithmetic showing that they could consider either fractions of decimals or, 0.0000. Then how did they manage to do it if they did it? Well, I'm going to just do a simple exercise with you tonight. I'm not even going to take up the subject of Hawaiian genealogy per se. I'm just going to give you the impression that so-called Howleys had, and this word that is really objectionable in our vocabulary, but we continue to use it that way. How did they perceive our system when they came here and looked at it. And what did they do to convince us that we had to go to school and learn how to count? Right? Huh? Well, you have two sheets in front of you, right? And I want you to do this with me backwards, okay? We're going to go backwards because we're going to apply the principle that John G. Stokes, John F. G. Stokes, who did a lot of studies of Hawaiian royal genealogies, and he wrote a lot of articles based on his understanding of these royal genealogies. This one happens to be the Ulu that you're holding. Ulu and non-Ulu migrations. Ulu came with his brother. And I use the Ulu genealogy when I'm trying to do something fine because the other one is minus so many generations, but the Ulu doesn't miss a beat. It doesn't ever. So John S. G. Stokes, like his predecessor, Abraham Fornander, applied the rule of thumb that in dealing with genealogies of all kinds, whether it's Japanese, Chinese, Hawaiian, whatever, you apply at least 25 years per generation because it's understood that a man, not a woman, but a man, has a son usually before his 25th year. So if you say 25 years is a generation, you can trust that more than likely his son who follows him will be within the next 25 years. It may not fit actual genealogical counts because Polynesians were having babies, especially women when they were 12, 13, and males when they were 15, 16, or 18. However, it's a convenient tool, a convenient formula. So if we look at this genealogy, let's start off from the back. If we allow 25 years per generation, go to Kamehameha and look at his date. That's one that Dorothy Burr uses because the historical records of Kamehameha all agreed was about 40 years when when Captain Cook came. So you figure Captain Cook's date of arrival and then figure out that Kamehameha is about 40 years old and then you count the back. So this is an adjusted date of 1758 for Kamehameha. So come down, let's say the 1st century to Kekealani, Wahine, and that's about 1633, so a century earlier. Those are 4 generations. Then down to Keli Okaloa to about 1533 is another 100 years. So in this time, if we go back up, we say, okay, Captain who came and died here, there's a Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Colony 1620. Can you tell me what's happening between 1542 and say 1533 and 1608? Well, that's the Elizabethan age. So we get down to Rumiali law, about the beginning of the 16th century. I want you to look at this date, which we start off at the bottom. It's 1992 AD, present, that's the present time. What stars are in the zenith of Kaho'olawe? Thus, Leo, and Sheraton, and Aries. The reason why that's there in that is that when the Kaho'olawe Conveyance Commission sent me to do archaeological work, the so-called possible celestial sites or celestially aligned sacred sites on Kaho'olawe. Essentially, they told us you go look for them and you have the legends in hand and you go check them out. And I thought, gee, how am I going to do that in 48 hours? So I told him, look, folks, I'll do it for you on one condition. You give me your best Navy celestial navigation instructor. And he's got to have a sextant with him because we're going to shoot these sites during the day and align them and check them out to the stars that rise at night in our overhead because I wanted that to be accurate. Sure enough, the lieutenant came get all the data down before we even got there. And all we did then was check the sites ahead of the line to specific stones or other things. And within that 48-hour period, I came back and wrote my first report for the commission. They sent me back a second time, and we had the big hurricane within the next 2 days called Iniki. So we all rushed back. But within the few hours, a few days that I had there, the only thing that really helped me was a small little ugly map that Ines Ashdown, who had lived there on the island, allowed us to have. And it showed two rocks on a ridge, which we had seen with Abraham P. Anaya. It showed two pillars, on the ridge. So we went back and checked them out. Long hike down with Yoshi, Zinato's son, myself, Heidi's four, and I checked out the names of these two huge rocks we'd seen on the horizon, on the ridge. Came back, I looked at the charts, compared them to how people who fly airplanes look at these locations, made kind of an analog. And then I called Peter Michaud at the Bishop Museum, and I said, Peter, I want you to tell me if you can roll those years back, as they do in the Einstein Spacarium. You can tell me what stars were in the zenith and at the latitude of Kaho'olawe, and give me the rate of change. And he did. I said, I think it's about 500 years. Because we did this up in Walla Walla, Washington, in a fancy planetarium up there. And that's the rate we got for the Pleiades. So the Pleiades shifted its position along the horizon every 500 years. So you tell me why Makali'i is in the latitude of Kaho'olawe, facing east in a very unlikely place. So these dates that you see, 1992, and as you go up this genealogy, have been tagged into the genealogical reckoning of the 25 years to show you that in the generations where those Hawaiians were coming up, during the migration, so you see these names go back in the centuries by which we're reckoning the generations by 25 years to a generation. We don't know when these people were before, and once you get past, come and help me out, it's a guess. Then we know at least what was in the zenith. And these stars are stable, right? They move positions so slowly that you can more or less trust celestial data a lot more than genealogies. Because the genealogies, people are being born more earlier or later. But if you use a date with a celestial event, such as the Pleiades will be rising 992 or 492 in such a place, that if the Hawaiians put a pillar there and they did Makali'i, they had a reason. Given the same premise as we do with Kukaniloko, then I'll show you another picture. Where's this? Yeah, right. The same day, practically, that we came here to Kualoa at about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and waited till dawn to get the position of the sun. And as you know, the weather doesn't always, it's not always in your favor. So it's kind of a muggy day, both at sunrise in Kualoa and then sunset or near sunset at Kumulipo. So why did I go over there? Why did I go over here at this particular time? Because I was timing the Pleiades year, and not only that, but the rate at which the sun moves along the horizon between December, say winter solstice in the south, and June or summer solstice in the north. And see, I know from having done this over a 4-year period that the slow sun is down here past the tail of the dragon between, say, December and January, very slow coming around here, and then it goes zzz, the other way. It's a fast sun. It goes up to the north side, then brushes back, slows down, and then takes that slow ride around the other end. Now that's the year, that's the kind of a year where, say, a kahuna will go, right? Let's get away from the GI calendar for a while and just look at what this tells us. Kahunas will do this who are checking something that Maui did. So you tell me, what did Maui do with the sun? He snared it, right? When did he snare it? He snared it to make it go slow, didn't he? And it went fast, it was going north. So he slowed it down and he succeeded around, say, between November and January. But it tells you something about these ancient stories. They wouldn't tell you about that in the story unless they were watching the sun when it was closest to the earth, perihelion, and farthest from the earth at aphelion. And they knew that 1 year from perihelion to perihelion was one kind of a year that we don't use every day. It's called an anomalistic year. The Pleiades year is a different kind of year. There's several calculations that are used. There's a 354 days plus 11.25 in the lunar year. There's a Pleiades year and you're watching the Pleiades come over when? November, right? On the 21st, comes up there in the evening, in the east. You wait for it to come up there again. And you still don't have it right unless you're watching the first new moon after the first evening rise in the east. And there's plenty more of those calculations, but this is what I do for fun. I go out with my friend, with her camera. She teaches at Lanakila. We love to watch Venus in the morning, so we take the ride all the way out in Pukaki when I watch Venus. Then the sun comes up, we go down to Kuloa, and we stand at the same spot and shoot the sun playing out where it is. And this is just baby stuff. It's not calculating metric versus whatever that caused that little mess with right? They lost some $1 billion stuff up there because they made the wrong miscalculation, right? Yep. Now, if you do this then, if you go back very diligently along this route, every time you get to this zenith star, you check it. Check it and check it. That's one way of trying to understand the ancients. In terms of how, let's say, Edwin Drury Brines, he makes this comment that the Hawaiians are watching something very subtle. The tonic cycle is entirely different from this. This is the zenith sun, zenith stars. Mexico uses that system. So you want to go, find out how this one would work. You go check the Mexican records. How terrific those people are, the Aztecs, the Mayas, so on. So my idea of time is that I would say this to my students. I believe that I'm correct if I say I'm an aborigine of the planet. I was saying that to my librarian friend at the University of Miles, Jackson. He said, "Ruby, you're radical." You're really radical. I said, "That's it. I don't think you can lock me in anywhere. You can't make me listen to the limiting factor that I have to be ethnically from this and that. I love my family. I love my backgrounds. I love my Hawaiian stuff. But I want to go learn how they were thinking in places like Egypt. And if I find that we have a calendar It's not this anomalistic one, this is Austronesian, through and through, Lapita, stuff, Tana, Uber Alice. Yeah, right? Wolfgram is in the back. He's watching me. But if you look at history, the 3500 BC, and these people in India made that determination, and they wrote it into their poetry. My goodness. It's like that when you study the Venus count too. You know the egg, count, you study Easter eggs. We did that folklore for 6,000. I had him in Indiana. Oh, he was mean and cruel. Oh my goodness. But see, I learned from him. He spoke, read, wrote 25 languages. Then my colleagues at the University of Hawaiʻi, there was one who did Cambodian, Khmer, and the other one did Hindi, Tamil. I used to sit in his Sanskrit class and his Arabic class and just marvel at his skill. And that's what made Nainohoku possible. You know, or I wouldn't have been able to read through 256 dictionaries. I did, you know. I went to the library and culled through 256 dictionaries, looking for meanings to star names. And when I got through, I threw all the ones that weren't related away. Tons of boxes. And just this past year, I got sick and tired of all of my compasses. I had 2 loose leaf folders that thick with wind and star compasses in every language in the world I could possibly find. I took them and just dumped them in the trash.
Oh,
I did. You know why? I said, who's going to read all of this? Nobody. But from doing that, I knew the farthest point west that knew Tokelau. How did I know it? Well, because the original Tokelau is Togelagu. Gelagu is the east, and To is a marker. So Togelagu, Saipan, Chamorro language, Marianas, they know where Tokelau is. So I went back through all of the languages through Asia, as far back as I could find a likely comparable term, and I found it in Tamil. East is Kiraku. Okay, Raku, right? Mau, Gelagu, Tokelau, Ko'olau. Right? Possible, not impossible. Because those are the people who figured out the 3517 BC, with the Pleiades year. And beyond them, the Sumerians. And just for folklore and comfort, before you need to tell you this story, but they had a big conference on the first Ethnoshan was Ethnoshan International Conference with about 600 to 900 delegates, among whom were people like Gerald Hawkins and all the people, John Eddy. I mean, there I was in that audience. And I had gone because they had told Armando da Silva, who did his work at Ahua that they would not accept his argument or his proof because the missionaries had come. See, so everything on the ecliptic or on the level of what you would call advanced civilizations could not have been possible with that introduction of other ideas in Mahayana in the seminary. So they wouldn't accept the Ahua proof that he had in his paper before the Academy of Sciences in New York. So I said, I'm going to go and just show them that all those names in Hawaiian mud are local and indigenous. They said, well, you have 7 minutes, that's all. And you have to prove it in 7 minutes. So I drew these diagrams. Then I went to Washington and I stayed at Bob's son's house. He let me stay there, and I used to go and drive and try to find the Rochambeau Bridge and all those places and get lost and wind up heading north at night, lose my way. But a Russian scholar gave a paper and he said, and I was listening to him, he said the cult of Mary is this, and he tied it in to lots of wonderful things. But I got up in the meeting, I said, no, you're forgetting that the Venus cult and the egg cult is very much earlier. It doesn't have anything to do with Virgin Mary in the Bible. So because of that, I had an interesting life. Because I'd exposed myself. And, I got an invitation to go to the Soviet Union. And I went, and I'm glad I came home alive. Because over there I got into some 007 experiences. Yeah, it was one of those exciting things in my life as a scholar. But, you know, I love all this stuff, but it's all words, no more than that, in numbers. But if you take it as a whole, it's all of us on the planet. I mean, we're all really living in the same time war. Our only differences are few. And if we don't, lose the faith, if we keep the faith, we'll make it. I hope, anyway. We don't blow one another up in this world. We need to talk to one another more. And the most important thing is, of course, family. So I remember when Joe used the topic, it's about time. I said, well, gee, if this fellow were on that TV program where James Lipton comes on and he asks Meryl Streep and all the other actresses and actors who come on that program, if they got up to heaven and believed in God, what they wanted to say when they got there. Well, I ran out of it. It's about time that I'll say, what took you so long? That's it, folks. I'm not going to give a lecture all day. You got to go to work in the morning.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Question.
Did Archaeological have a mathematical system? And if so, it sounds like they did. How did it differ from the Arabic?
Will you repeat the question?
Did Archaeological have a mathematical system? And it sounds like they did. What was the difference with the Arabic system?
Okay, Arabic numerals were borrowed from Hindu numerals. Because the Sanskrit numerals, start off with 0. You study Sanskrit. You find that the Arabs borrowed the 0 from there, but it could have been earlier, like in Cambodia. So if you have a 0 system with Arabic numerals, then your highest number is going to be what? I mean, in the set of numbers, where are you going to stop it? In a decimal system. Where are you going to stop? If you start counting at 0, where are you going to stop your number? At 9. Because your next 0 point is going to be what? 10. And you can see, if you take this pencil and we're a line, and you take this point, which is at 0, and take it this way back, then you have only 9 intermediate, say knots if you had a 9 string. So the Hawaiian system comes up to, is a decimal system. But if you take Hawaiian language, they won't teach you that there's a 0 point at all. They'll tell you it means not, but it's the 0 point. So you get a 0 to 9, then the next 10 is going to be umi, kuma, kahi, 10 plus 1. And then they do a funny thing, right, when they get to 18, they say, what? They get to 20, they say, Iba Kalua, right? It's 2 times 9 equals 18. So what's 18 doing at 20 place, which should be the 3rd decimal number, increasing by 10s. Does it mean now they started losing count? That they didn't know how to count in the decimal system? Well, if you go back to Captain Cook's vocabularies that were collected by his lieutenants, they collected all the kanas, you know, the 10 plus 10, or when you get to kana is what, 40, right? Kanaha is 40. That's your first kana number. Is it kana kolu? Yeah, kana kolu, kanaha. So 20 Cook collected kana lua. So what made the Hawaiians change? Maybe because it also meant doubt, and it was a bad word to use. So they changed it in between the time Cook arrived in 1778 and 1820 to 26 when they collected the other numbers and wrote them down. The Hawaiian system is a decimal system, which is where you get the decimals to. And the Marquesan system is a vigesimal. It's in 20s. The Babylonians I like, because they have 60. Because that's how come I got this watch. You see? If there were no Babylonians, we wouldn't have this watch. Base 60. But I don't know how to do the metric thing. I still go by feet, pounds, you know. I have never adjusted to metrics, really. The Hawaiians are very interesting people. For example, that rock that we're looking at, Kumulipo, it's 18 inches from the ground. The Hawaiians had a house 18 inches by 18 by 36. And the rock just about matches those numbers. It's the main one in the middle of the Heyerdahl. Interesting thing. But that's another subject for another time.